do very quick introductions, and then we'll jump into it. Samson?
Hello, I'm Samson Mow. I'm the CEO of Gen3. We are a company focused on accelerating hyper-Bitcoinization or Bitcoin adoption around the world.
I am the president of the AAB, the Bitcoin Fund Management Agency of the government of El Salvador. My name is Nina Bardi, and I'm very pleased to be here. Welcome all.
Thank you. My name is Fernando Arriola. I'm a co-founder and on the board of the FinTech Chamber of Paraguay. We're 127 financial services companies that are providing financial services for Paraguayans. Right now, I'm also head of the legislative part of the chamber, and right now we're promoting about 15 different legislations to, let's say, promote financial inclusion for the national population.
Great, thank you very much. Samson, in your introduction, you mentioned hyper-Bitcoinization, and this reminds me of when I first started talking to institutional investors about Bitcoin. The idea of hyper-Bitcoinization and hash wars was something I thought, this is too crazy. We can't talk to these guys about this. It's too crazy. So just be, Bitcoin is digital gold. But everything seems to be changing very, very quickly. And even when I put these questions together, a week or 2 weeks ago, and I thought, by the time I knew that the Trump inauguration was coming, that everything's going to change by the time I get the questions to everyone. So what does Bitcoin sovereign adoption look like at the moment? And how do you see that evolving? I mean, this is such a hard question, but how do you see it evolving in the next year or so?
Yeah, it's a very interesting landscape right now. I would say the Trump administration is a big part of the catalyst that is shifting the narrative, the greater narrative. But overall, we see a good amount of Bitcoin adoption at the nation-state level. El Salvador, of course, has started early. And last year, we saw Bhutan was revealed to be a holder of Bitcoin through mining. And there's a number of other large entities at the nation state or sovereign level that are accumulating, that are not very public about it. And they might be doing some other projects too, like mining projects too. So overall, it's accelerating. I think we like to say slow, gradually, then suddenly. And I think this is the case for nation state adoption. It's going to pick up very rapidly. And again, people are looking at the US very closely to see what the Trump admin will do. And if they do implement a strategic reserve of Bitcoin at the nation level, then I believe we'll see a massive piling on of everyone else.
That $1 million target price that was very...
1 million's a floor.
Okay. Nina, the AAB has a really unique mandate. Can you talk a bit about what that mandate is and how that fits into El Salvador's overall Bitcoin strategy?
Yes. Okay. As a path for the Bitcoin strategy, we have the creation of a solid ecosystem through the digital assets law approved by National Congress of El Salvador after the Bitcoin law, where we were mandated to manage, administer, invest, and safeguard all the digital assets of the state of El Salvador. As you can see, the AAB was created as the custodian of Bitcoin belonging to the government of El Salvador and as the issuer for the state's tokenizations, managing all the funds in Bitcoin received through it. Obviously, as a result, you can see that we now have the first nation-state strategic Bitcoin reserve, very famous nowadays, of the world. And that's a vehicle for the Bitcoin law, actually, to achieve or to lead us through financial inclusion for the strategy of Bitcoin adopting in El Salvador, I think. So this is very clear. The path is clear, and we're following up.
Forward, that any of the issuances that the government of El Salvador does will actually be issued by your department, by the AAB. Is that correct? Fernando, we've touched on this in the previous conversation about the interaction that El Salvador has had with other countries within the region. Argentina is a very famous one. Everybody saw the pictures and the videos on X. Paraguay seems like, given the abundance of power infrastructure, the hydro energy, it seems like a no-brainer, like a really solid fit for Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining and leveraging a digital asset regime. Can you kind of give us an update on what the status of the situation is in Paraguay and what the attitude of the policymakers and the regulators is at the moment?
Well, thank you very much for the question. Everybody wants to know this question. So, in C's, well, look, it's a long story. I've been in the legislative environment for a long time, and I've been fighting for Bitcoin for about 7 years in Paraguay. So
Feels like 100, I'm sure.
200. So, I mean, the last legislation that we had passed and the president of Paraguay 2 years ago vetoed, we got to kind of like reboot it in the past year. So we have a new legislation that we're working with the central bank, the superintendency of, let's say the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Ministry of Industry and Commerce, and the president's office, which is a great honor. We're seeing a lot of openness in terms of regulating, let's say, regulating emission processes for Paraguay. If we're talking about Bitcoin mining, there are a lot of complications because the government is the owner of that energy. Well, they say it's the Paraguayan people, but at the end of the day, we have a power police, which is the National Administration of Energy. And right now we're going into a hurdle in where Paraguay is negotiating with Brazil for the Annex C, which is going to determine if Bitcoin mining will be really feasible for the near future. Why? It's because if Paraguay and Brazil establish that the price of power will be lower, because the price of power that Paraguay sells to Brazil is around $19.76. And we're being sold energy as miners for about $46 per megawatt hour. So if the price of energy goes down, legally, the National Administration of Energy has to reduce the price of energy for miners. And there's a special determination and status for mining. If you do industrial activities, the price of energy is only $29. So they're giving us they're making a lot of money out of us, and that's really good for the government, but not really good for maintaining, let's say, a long-term assurance of capacity, really. So, as a miner, I might tell you, it's not a good feeling, So what we're doing as a chamber is, trying to find the best ways not to fight the government and try to show them, hey, this is the right way. And I might say, the Comisión Nacional de Activos Digitales of El Salvador has been a great help. We've done a lot together. We're getting in touch with that WEEP, which is the entity that supervises money laundering in the country. There's been a lot of links. It's been very positive, and I'm very surprised at the openness for the Paraguayan government. Now, we have a lot of details that we're going through, but I mean, the positive situation is having a response, and for the response not to be no, maybe,
So many years ago, when I was talking to the regulators, I'm based in Taiwan, talking to the regulators in Taiwan about Bitcoin and security tokenization, their first question is, okay, what is the U.S. doing? So if the U.S. made this huge switch in their attitude and their policy, their stance towards Bitcoin, what would the impact be in Paraguay, do you think?
Immediate impact, because the main issue with Paraguay in the financial system, and I think the same thing here in El Salvador, is corresponding banking. So, for me, and I'm owner of a financial institution, and I have shares in a regulated financial institution. The main issue is in the compliance board is indicating, well, guys, if we do this, will Bank of New York close our account? Will Citibank not allow certain kinds of clients to open accounts with us or provide them interbank clearing? I mean, that's the main issue. If the U.S., and this is actually something that I shouldn't say, but it's something internal with the central bank and commingling, they've indicated, we're waiting for the U.S. We're waiting for the U.S. and Brazil. Brazil's already given a clear panorama of what they're going to do. I mean, Bitcoin and USDT are pretty much a free use kind of situation. What they did in 2017 and kind of following what the Internal Revenue Service of the United States did and followed by the Receita Federal of Brazil is try to find innovative ways to determine how big the market is. And that's something that Paraguay has not done. For us, OFAC, which is, it's a serious name and it's scary to some people, gave Paraguay's number to me. He's like, Fernando, why are you not doing anything about it? I'm like, what are you talking about? It's like, well, in Paraguay, you're moving about $6.5 billion a year in digital assets. And that was, that's 12% of the Paraguayan GDP. So when we talked to the regulator about it, it was a funny situation. He's like, I don't believe you. Okay, I'll bring Chuck up on the line. You can talk to Chuck. I was like, okay. So
ergo, I'm here. So they're listening, which is something very positive. In the most attractive situation is if the U.S. does this, then we have a clear way to also talk about digitalization of real world assets, which is our goal.
That's great. Samson, when I saw you in Bitcoin Tokyo, you had a chart up on screen about the different countries that had adopted Bitcoin. And I think within that, it's kind of funny that only Bhutan and I think El Salvador had actually acquired Bitcoin. The rest had all acquired Bitcoin through seizure. So I wanted to ask you a question at that time. I didn't get the chance, so we had to bring you here. But the question is, why aren't there more countries?
I think there are, but they're probably not disclosing. If you look at the case of Bhutan, it was only through, I think, the Celsius claims that they were revealed to have crypto assets. And if that didn't come out, then we still wouldn't know today that Bhutan has this big mining operation and $1.3 billion worth of Bitcoin. But I think it takes a lot of effort to start a strategic reserve. It's easier to seize it from proceeds of crime and other ways. But to actually sit down and say we're going to buy Bitcoin is a conscious decision. And I think other than El Salvador, we haven't really seen that yet, at least publicly. So it's just a difficulty in crossing that barrier. And like we talked about before, there is this perception that, it's risky to go into Bitcoin. But I think that perception of risk is starting to become swinging the other direction now, that it is risky not to get into Bitcoin, especially with the Trump admin trumpeting all the benefits of Bitcoin and all the senators talking about it.
So do you think what's keeping other countries from kind of announcing this is more, or doing this is more inertia, or do you think it's pushback from maybe kind of supranational, international organizations, or both?
A little bit of both. A little bit of Category A and Category B. So I think we saw today in the morning the Czech Republic Central Bank is going to put a vote to putting 5% of reserves into Bitcoin. And that was not actually the first one. We had engaged with the Central Bank of Suriname, talking with them over a series of months to put 1% allocation, but that was nixed after the World Bank paid them a visit. So I think there are cases where a lot of these countries, they're not fully sovereign, and they have these supranational forces pressuring them not to touch Bitcoin. But then the other part is maybe there are countries that are acquiring and they don't want to trumpet it to the world and say, we're buying so they can keep buying more.
So El Salvador has obviously had some news with the IMF. It was quite a big story over the last couple of months. Do you think El Salvador creates a template for this? Because I think a deal has now been worked out on how to negotiate this. They seem to not be fully opposed to Bitcoin. They just want to make it participatory, not mandatory. Does that maybe provide a pathway for countries to kind of navigate that? Maybe Nina or Samson or Fernando, if you have a thought.
Please. Okay. So as far as I know, I think that is going to be the way. So they are not opposing they are not opposing to Bitcoin. They are actually very, very happy with the agreements we came up. I'm not informed of the particulars, but what I think is for other countries that can be a path to follow.
Well, for me specifically, and I've been asked this question a lot, it depends really on the microeconomics and the macro politics of the situation, and where each country relies on for kind of, its sustainability. In terms of Paraguay, I can't really say that, the legalization of Bitcoin as legal tender will help at all, because we're already having enough hurdles to be considered investment grade, and having reducing our inflation targeting targets, let's say, in terms of let's say just devaluation of the U.S. dollar. So if we add another barrier, it might alienate the whole population. They're 60% of the population don't even have bank accounts. So I think that for us, and depending on personally for us, our main goal is bankerization or innovative ways for people to be able to have financial services to pretty much, develop their lives and their businesses. And I think about it in this way. Let's say 85% of Paraguayans rely on moneylenders and loan sharks. So I think that if we're talking about social issues, we should really rely on how should we help the people, and how can we give those people the possibility of improving their lives and keeping more in their pockets so they can improve their lives really. So if that way if the way is, the legalization of Bitcoin, great. I think that's been the way in El Salvador, and it's worked out. But the thing is, El Salvador didn't have a legal tender. It had the U.S. dollar, and it relied directly on the U.S., and that brings another kind of geopolitical problems. So Paraguay doesn't have that issue. Also, Argentina doesn't have that issue, or Brazil. I mean, even if those countries have a lot of political issues, the people still use and rely on their legal tender. And if you take that away from them, it might take their identity away. So you have to always think about the psychological part of consumption on this.
Interesting. Nina, maybe put you on the spot just slightly. So, I know the AAB is working on a number of digital asset issuances. There's one in particular that we're very much waiting for, but I promised I wouldn't ask you about it.
Thank you.
So what type of issuances do you think we're most likely to see from the AAB?
Well, security tokens, let's say a Bitcoin-based security token backed and leveraged by liquidity, as, for example, the Volcano token.
You said it. Okay. Said the word. But I think there's also plans to do, to use sovereign issuances to do things like infrastructure investment and all of that stuff. Is that the strategy?
Yes, that's part of the strategy, and also the real-world assets tokenization, as you mentioned it. Of course, that means the tokenization of capital markets too. That's something that is on the pipeline, and I think that's the vehicle that will lead us to financial inclusion at the end of the days, because we open up the markets for everyone, and that is an opportunity for everyone to invest in a secure way and very cheap, cost effective, nice return.
Samson, when you're talking to policymakers, what are they most interested in? Are they interested in Bitcoin and are your conversations about building up a strategic reserve, or is it about a digital asset framework and kind of the things that Fernando and Nina have both touched on about, rebuilding their capital markets and giving them a technological upgrade so they can compete better with more mature markets?
That's an interesting question. I'm not really sure what they really want. We were on a call with... We're on a call with some people from a city in Asia, and they're interested in everything under the sun. And they even wanted to bring in blockchains. And we kind of tried to steer the conversation more towards Bitcoin. But it's very early. You'd think that people would understand what Bitcoin can do and the path forward, but it's actually not. So I think we are very early still. And one of the kind of confounding points is they're interested in banking the unbanked or bringing more financial freedom. But then on the other hand, they say, well, okay, how do we regulate this thing? And I kind of say, like, if you could regulate things and bring people into the financial system, you could just give everyone a bank account. You don't need Bitcoin. And then they kind of start to realize, okay, well, maybe we're approaching it the wrong way. But this whole talk about financial freedom doesn't really jive with, we're going to regulate everything and KYC every single person, because if you could have done it, you would have done it. There's a line in The Social Network where I think it was like Mark Zuckerberg or someone asking the Winklevoss twins, like, if you would have built Facebook, you would have built Facebook. So if you could have financially included everyone, you would have done it already. So you don't need Bitcoin. So I think it's just a matter of steering the conversation in the right way and bringing the knowledge that we have and pushing that narrative that you can bring about financial freedom, but you have to realize that there are certain things that you won't be able to do, and that is regulating money.
All right, now I want to ask you a slightly more exciting question. So in the last couple of weeks, we've seen a lot of action out of the U.S. So we've seen an executive order creating a crypto czar in the U.S. We've got talk of a national digital assets stockpile and what that could be comprised, what that is. We saw the president of the United States and his wife both issue meme coins. Are we moving in the right direction? Like, what are your thoughts on this? What do you think is going to happen with the U.S. and is this kind of the right direction? Please go ahead.
I mean, you can't be a Bitcoiner and be against the free market. So President Trump and First Lady Melania can issue all the meme coins they want. And I think the market will ultimately sort itself out, and these things will trend to zero over time. But it's a mixed bag. There are positive developments, like the talk of the Bitcoin reserve, which now sounds like
Is it a Bitcoin reserve?
well, now they're saying digital asset reserve, so they're trying to be inclusive of all the altcoins, right? And be diverse and equitable and inclusive. And you can make of that what you will. But I think the only thing you want in a strategic reserve is digital gold, which is Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So I think it's an interesting time, and we'll see where things go. And there was a big backlash against XRP, Ripple pushing for inclusion of their token in the reserve. And it's really up to the government. It's like an IQ test at this point. Are they going to do the right thing or the wrong thing? And hopefully they follow El Salvador and stay Bitcoin only. But it's an interesting time, and I don't really know which direction it will go in.
Yeah, it really feels like everything is up for grabs. Like anything can happen in any direction. Fernando, Nina, any thoughts on this? What's happening in the U.S.?
I totally agree with. I totally agree with Samsung. Okay, you only can build a reserve on gold, digital gold, and that is Bitcoin. You cannot go inclusive with all the alter coins and move forward that way. You need to choose it. They have already the dollar, US dollars. We need to swap for USDT to have it, and then now we have Bitcoin. So I think we're building a very strong and robust ecosystem here. So they will maybe one day follow up that. And I think they started on the opposite way because they started with the ETFs. And then moving to building a strategic reserve, I think is the opposite. If you want Bitcoin adopted in some financial market, what you need first is to create reserves. This is what we think.
Well, I lived in the U.S. for most of my life, and I might have to say something personal, and that's for me. First of all, the meme coin situation. It's all it's not all Trump. It's all smoke and mirrors, for God's sakes. So what's really, and when I'm not hearing and understanding about the situation, which is concerning, is all right. And I know the financial side of the business because I'm fully in finance. So and let's talk about corresponding banking again. What's Citibank New York telling me? Or these big banks, not to say names or promote anything, when I tried to repatriate funds to my own country, to my own bank account. We don't have a federal law. And because we don't have a federal law, we're so scared that if we do something wrong, and even if laws are not retroactive, there might be somebody that sues us for something that we're doing wrong. So I think the base situation right now, it's all up in the air. I don't even know if they have a clear guideline of a legislative process that they're going to go through. And if they use Bitcoin as a reserve, and I do completely agree with you, it should be only Bitcoin. If you're going to try to add a whole bunch of things again, and we all remember the crash of 2008 that created Bitcoin. Are we going to do that again? It doesn't make any sense. So right now, if they do that, if they even go through a 1% deposit over the GDP of the United States, that will help drastically, soothe inflationary economics. I mean, Bitcoin will increase in value. We don't understand if the U.S. economy will. I mean, it's all, as you said, it's all up for grabs. So for me, it's very concerning.
I kind of feel like the Bitcoin reserve is icing on the cake. Like if we could just get an end to Choke Point 2.0 and the correspondent banks that you're talking about, and then maybe some clarity on the taxation issues, which I think have really held Bitcoin back in the U.S. Like every time you buy a coffee, it's a taxable event. If you had clarification on that and an end to Choke Point 2.0, I think that's all we need. I don't know. Totally. Yeah. So Samson, one thing I wanted to ask you about was, so BlackRock has become kind of an aggressive supporter of Bitcoin and security tokenization overall. Last week, we saw Larry Fink had comments that he wanted to push the SEC on allowing tokenization of equities and bonds. At the same time, we had some kind of high-profile market commentators also say from the US-based, that work at Bloomberg, saying that security tokenization is maybe not in any way beneficial or innovative. So I wonder, like, who's right? Is it Larry Fink, or is there nothing here? Are we kind of wasting our time with Bitfinex Securities and the AAB and the Senate?
Well, I think there is something there, and it's a return to kind of bearer bonds. And that's how I look at security tokens. It's going back to being able to have a piece of paper and it's mine, and I can trade it peer-to-peer if I want. So I think there is something there. And then there's additional benefits, which I heard you talk about earlier, which is 24/7 trading. The new nature of this security is that you can't naked short. And with the centralized system, you can have naked shorts. You can stop runs like the GameStop run up, right? Like they control the whole system. So I think there are controls in place that security tokens bring to the market, and it is a benefit. So in this case, I would agree with Larry Fink. The challenge has always been the liquidity pool, and we'll see. I think a big issuance, like a volcano token or something, could drive and be that catalyst.
For example?
But yeah, for example, you need something really big, because right now most issuances are very small, and the market is still very fragmented. You know, there is Bitfinex Securities, there's a couple other ones in the US, but they're all very illiquid and very small. But if you can get something really big in Bitfinex Securities, you know, for example, then I think that is the catalyst to trigger the market. Or maybe BlackRock does it. I don't know. But everything's up for grabs again.
That would be crushing.
Right. Are you talking about the volcano token? Yeah. Maybe
Maybe a time frame.
Okay.
Nina, I wanted to ask you also, you mentioned previously about the interaction that the AAB has had with your counterparties in other countries in El Salvador. And also following up on the question that I asked Samson earlier is the interest from the other countries that you're talking to, is it about a digital asset framework? Is it about tokenized securities and upgrading the technology behind their domestic securities markets? Or is it about building Bitcoin reserves and how to buy Bitcoin and how to custody Bitcoin?
Well, I think it's about tokenization first and the technology, raising up the technology. And I think they should be following up also, or they were interested also in build this strategic reserve for them. They now get it. They now saw it. They now see the example, and I think they will follow up that too.
That's great. All right, we're coming to the end. I want to leave a little bit more time for questions here, but to finish things up, I want to ask everyone, what are you looking forward to most in 2025? I mean, this seems like last year was a big year. We finally got the ETF that everybody had been waiting for a decade. It feels like this year is going to be about sovereign digital asset, Bitcoin adoption, and digital asset frameworks. So what are you looking forward to most in 2025? What are kind of your expectations, and maybe what are the challenges that you see as well?
I think the most exciting thing for 2025 is seeing Bitcoin go to 1 million. I believe the previous bull runs were all muted through things like fraud, like FTX and whatnot. And we should be well over 100 already. That's what I'm going with. So the other bottleneck that's been removed is the onboarding of capital into Bitcoin. So previous cycles, the bottleneck is exchanges, being able to go through KYC and onboard onto exchanges. And that was when they would get overloaded with the backlog of months. But now with the ETFs, anybody can access a Bitcoin derivative. So that removes that bottleneck for capital flowing into Bitcoin.
Sure, it's like a layer 2.
Yeah, it's like a layer 2. Don't tell Blockstream. But it's a way for money to come quickly into Bitcoin. And I don't think it's fully played out yet. So if you look at things like the COVID crackdown and lockdowns and all that, the effects of that didn't play out for 2 to 3 years. And the ETFs are another major inflection point. And we're only a year after that now. So I think this year we'll start to see people come to that realization that, one, they need Bitcoin. And the market will see that there is no bottleneck preventing TradFi capital from flowing into Bitcoin. And we're seeing more demand for Bitcoin from all sectors, nations, corporations, etc.
I've kind of got an optimistic view of this. Do you think that like Bitcoin is kind of like a Trojan horse where you buy it, you make money, number goes up, and then as it goes up, you understand it better and you kind of embrace the values behind Bitcoin. Do you think that will happen with the ETF investors and these institutional investors? And I see there's an application in for in-kind redemptions and subscriptions for Bitcoin. Do you think this ultimately could be kind of a product that leads into people understanding Bitcoin more? I think right now in the US and probably most mature markets, people only see Bitcoin as digital gold. They haven't priced in like peer-to-peer electronic cash at all. Do you think that can kind of happen?
Yeah, definitely. It's an access point for a lot of people, and a lot of people that may not have been interested are now getting interested to dabble in Bitcoin as a security, as an ETF share, or as MicroStrategy. And then once they understand a little bit, they see, okay, this is a real thing, and they might get a wallet. They might download Aqua or something and buy some real Bitcoin, and they'll just go down the rabbit hole. I think the entry point for most people was, okay, this looks interesting. Either it was to buy drugs or to play with some digital money or something. But you don't just get into Bitcoin from day one thinking, okay, it's sound money and I'm interested in sound money.
Yeah, it's like your investment allocation goes from like 5% to like 85%, and you're like, oh, I better figure this out. Nina, Fernando, what are you looking forward to in 2025? What are the big highlights, do you think, and what are maybe some of the challenges that you can see?
Well, I mean, the highlights, hopefully, that Bitcoin is designated as a commodity. In that way, we don't have to pay capital gains or actually pay taxes over its exchange. And I think...
You mean in Paraguay? I mean, I think it's a commodity in the U.S.
Well, in Paraguay, yes, in general. But the thing is that the designation of digital assets within the United States are capital asset goods. And capital asset goods do pay capital gains. So the designation of commodities, I think it would be a lot better. I mean, that's hopefully a personal goal. Secondary, I mean, having a fiscal designation of what we do is wonderful. I mean, it all obviously helps to raise money. I mean, if you have an asset that doesn't have international designation, it really halts the process of gaining international investors, specifically institutional investors. Now, something else that we're waiting for is to obviously see Bitcoin raise. Not right now. I think that Bitcoin is halted by all this political drama that's going on in the United States, meme coins included, and I think it should, I have a more, let's say, safe approach. I think it might reach 500,000, hopefully, fingers crossed. And after that, more of this, more talking about what we're doing, more relating with other countries, relating with companies like yours to promote, financial freedom, and helping people find financing outside of banking conglomerates, and that's something that's very important.
What are you looking forward to most in 2025? Any big announcements or anything on your radar?
I think that's the challenge. The big challenge, I can see it in the first tokenization issuance of the government of El Salvador, for example. You know what? But but I think it's maybe coming soon. Not.
Okay.
We won't have to wait the whole year, I think.
Okay, we'll clip
for
that.
that.
That's the clip.
Yes, yes. Before the year ends, I think we will see it, and I think it's going to be a nice and a very, very big opportunity for the growth of El Salvador this year.
I think we're all waiting for it.
Hey, thank you.
All right, I want to thank the panelists very much for taking time and joining this panel today, and open it up to questions if everyone has questions. We've got a bit of time, so maybe 5 or 10 minutes for questions.
So I'm not sure if you want this question asked, but about the volcano topic, was it mentioned at all in the talks to get to an agreement with the IMF?
Volcanoes open was mentioned at all in the conversation.
Oh, I don't know. And that's a thing that I cannot answer. Maybe even help with? Oh.
It sounds like that probably wasn't addressed specifically.
It's a very political answer.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Any questions on another track?
Is it ever when lawmakers are discussing about the national Bitcoin fund, something like that? Is there ever get the problem of what should we do? Self-custody as a country or use a custodian? Because I see maybe that would be problem in both situations. So that's my question. Have they ever raised that problem?
Yeah, so I don't think that is probably further down the road. That's not an initial consideration at all. But self-custody at the initial state level is quite complex. And it can be dangerous too, because, you can have one government run off before the next one. So it's not a simple problem to solve, I believe. And a custodian might be better at the outset until they get some process in place and some robust system to deal with it internally. But I think that's the ultimate goal.
It is related to mining. Do you guys know when the next mining death spiral is? Just asking for a friend.
Fernando, I think you're probably most qualified to answer that.
What do you mean about death spiral? Because we're talking about we have a lot of death spirals. There's the equipment problem, there's the hash rate problem, there's the difficulty problem. Pick your spiral. We're all combined.
Or you pick it.
I mean specifically, and I've been in the mining business. I'm a self miner. I've been in this business for about 10 years, and and my parents and my grandparents. And I'll do this as kind of an assimilation.
Your parents and grandparents were Bitcoin miners?
No, they were in chicken farming, And what I see Bitcoin mining right now is just like how my parents stopped chicken farming. It's because the same guy that sells you the chicks sells you the feed and establishes what the market is. So specifically, that's what Bitcoin mining is right now. So it's specifically, we are in a spiral, and this started by the manufacturers. So who's making the real money right now?
You mean the manufacturers, the hardware manufacturers that
that's
actually
it.
make the mining machines?
That's it. And we're talking about specifically Bitcoin. There's 3 companies that dominate the market. We're not seeing more companies do this. And I mean, the spiral that right now is specifically the price of Bitcoin. Why? Because you have a financial sector that wants Bitcoin to be stable. And Bitcoin by nature is not stable. It relies on the market. So when you have us that are the back office for the mining, and we have to rely on governments, we have to rely on difficulty, we have to rely on irresponsible people mining with miners that are out of date, we're always in a spiral. So what would help is if after all the situation with Trump and everything else and all this politics stuff is if when Bitcoin goes up, us as miners see the other possibilities of hardware, collaborate on other types of possibilities of mining. And I think that we're always in a spiral, it's a very drastic business. I don't know if that responded to your question.
Yeah. Outside, I don't think there is a possibility of a mining death spiral anymore because more and more hash rate is now behind the meter. Either it's nations mining or entities that are public and large enough to borrow. There's really no need to spiral anymore. And I think if you look at the hash rate growth, it's just up and to the right. So it's like it doesn't really care what price is doing. Some entities don't care, and they're just adding hash rate regardless of price, up or down.
Maybe that ties into the conversation of Bhutan and some of these smaller countries that have rich in national resources, but they're poor in capital. So they're trying to, at zero cost, monetize the natural resources that they have. So as more of those come online, hash rate just goes up. Yeah. All right. Anyone else? Maybe we'll take one more question.
So let's play this 2 years ahead now, and a lot of Bitcoin strategic reserves have kicked in, and 80% of the Bitcoin is concentrated in top 7 nations doing Bitcoin strategic reserve or maybe states. how does that kind of affect the whole Bitcoin ecosystem where 7 become like the riskiest to actually go kaput with all the Bitcoin in the world? So the whole idea of Bitcoin gets killed as one possibility. So how does that play out? Asking for a flip.
That's an interesting question. So I think the summary is if we go forward 2 years and we have more Bitcoin reserves, and I guess the presumption is that it would be led by G7, by large countries with large balance sheets, and that they would end up with the majority of the Bitcoin. And is that antithetical to the kind of the Bitcoin value proposition and the ethos in Bitcoin in general? I'll take a stab at that. I think that that's not what we're seeing happening. So like Samson's chart is that there's 2 countries that hold Bitcoin right now. It's Bhutan and it's El Salvador. It's small countries that are able to move very, very quickly. Czech Republic is another one. It's not a G7. I don't even think it's G20. And there, so it seems like what we're seeing is the people that are adopting Bitcoin the fastest are the smaller countries. So from my perspective, I think it could be a real leveling where you see Bitcoin go up to $1 million and you see these smaller countries all of a sudden have, become very, very wealthy. And I think that we've seen the same thing within tokenized securities is we see this opportunity focused more in emerging markets and kind of small to mid-sized economies because they don't have the pushback from the incumbents and because they see the opportunity to kind of upgrade their capital markets ecosystems. So I think the people that will be the fastest movers are the smallest countries. So it's just like Bitcoin for us this is the only asset ever where retail investors could get in ahead of Larry Fink and BlackRock. And I think it'll probably be the same thing for smaller countries.
Also, it doesn't really matter if there is a concentration of Bitcoin because it's not a proof of stake system. Like they don't control the network; they just have the asset. So they'll disperse it over time as they buy things or don't. But there's no risk to the Bitcoin network itself. But I think actually the playing field is more level than people think. The largest holder right now is theoretically China with 190,000 coins. But there's rumors based on blockchain analytics that they've sold it all already. Because those were the seizure coins from Plus Token. You remember that. But yeah, that was wonderful. But it's likely that China has 0 now. And the US, it doesn't have, they're slated like 190 something, maybe 200, but they don't because they're returning 95,000 coins to Jesse, to Bitfinex. Just kidding, to Bitfinex. And that puts the US, on just like slightly over double what Ukraine is holding. So it's like not really an issue. The biggest issue is MicroStrategy with like close to 500,000. That's the future nation state.
Yeah. Totally agree.
Hail President Saylor.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for your time. And